Well, I'm so honored to be over here at the JFK Library, being invited by the Carlyle Foundation to speak on leadership, the work that I've been doing on leading well from within. And JFK is really one of the greatest leaders of our time. And he said, the mind is one of our most fundamental resources, and leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. And what's really profound is that here we are at the JFK Library, and we'll be speaking in a moment about how we lead well from within, how we learn about our mind so we can lead more effectively. We can lead more effectively from our highest selves. We'll be talking about how we go about navigate stress so we can focus on really what matters most in our life. And so the excitement of this over here is as we come together to learn to lead more effectively, collectively, we have the power to transform the world. I'm incredibly touched to be, as Rajesh was sharing, I'm thinking about Stephen Kennedy Smith alluding to JFK, saying that leadership is often born at the intersection and in the crucible between purpose and pain. And so for me, as Rajesh shared, when I went through my depression, it really embarked me on a journey to learn fundamentally how do we navigate stress, uncertainty, and self-doubt so we can focus on what really matters most to deliver more value in the world. And that's been the arc of my journey. And I look at this through the frame of leadership. And here at the JFK Library, it boggles my mind that we're here together today talking about leadership. And there's beauty in this because we spent the last few days speaking about health and well-being, health and wellness. So the focus of the work that I'm most passionate about is how do we engage in our own development or in the development of leaders to lead from their higher selves so we can create truly healthy, vibrant, and vital organizations that can deliver meaningful value in the world. So it's just, I see this as an act of beauty being here together, and so the work over here is leading well from within. Before we can effectively lead in the world, first place we need to know is how do we lead well inside ourselves. And so part of my journey is also informed at the intersection between two major movements that I've been blessed to serve in leadership roles. And the one movement is the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine. I've been blessed to serve have rotated now off as the founding chair. And the Academy is focused fundamentally not on maintaining the absence of disease, which is really a strong focus in conventional medicine, but really is focused on the creation of health. And that requires a radical redesign. And so the Academy says that optimal health is the conscious pursuit of the highest level of functioning of our physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and environmental aspects of human experience, resulting in a state of being fully alive. Wow. This results in a condition of well-being regardless of the presence or absence of disease. And taking that and integrating the concepts of neuroscience, mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, positive psychology, that has tremendous relevance in terms of how we can leverage this understanding to create healthy and vibrant organizations that deliver meaningful value. So that's one intersect. The other intersect of this is I'm blessed to serve an organization called Conscious Capitalism. How many of you are familiar with Conscious Capitalism? Okay, many of, but not all. So if you aren't familiar with them, you'll be familiar with the companies that have engaged or founded Conscious Capitalism. Companies like, and just think about the culture when I mention them, companies like Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Southwest Airlines, Patagonia. And they've come together to essentially leverage business for social transformation. And they run off 4 principles. Number 1 is higher purpose drives. Higher purpose drives. Number 2 is to make sure that all stakeholders are integrated in the system. And then the third principle is conscious leadership that drives conscious culture and a thriving environment. So what we're fundamentally talking about when we're talking about creating healthy leaders, we're talking about conscious leaders. And so when I think about conscious leadership and the value of conscious leadership, I showed this slide at the Global Wellness Summit. And when I arrived at the summit, I asked the question, I said, I've been to many beautiful wellness retreats, but what is it that separates one retreat from another retreat? And the answer was, does this place have a soul? Right? Does the place have a soul? And that goes for any business that we're working in. You can feel the fabric of soul when you step on Southwest Airlines. I traveled here on United Airlines, and I know that they're struggling right now. There's a difference in the fabric of the soul. And when you feel the fabric of the soul of a company, that tracks back to a glorious leader. And this over here is Sharon Kolker, who runs an incredible retreat in Australia called Gwingana. And because of her soul, she's able to actually facilitate highly engaged cultures. Individuals that can feel empowered to manifest their full creativity and vitality, discretionary effort beyond what is asked of them. Out of that comes profoundly rich client experience, the byproduct of which is a profitable enterprise. So my background is also in evidence-based medicine. I wrote one of the early textbooks on that. I want to just share with you the science track that connects this all together. Why our growth as leaders is fundamental to the value that we deliver in the world on so many levels. And I'm hoping that we can co-create this presentation together. So I'm so blessed. There's such an extraordinary collective of leadership here together with the capacity to transform the world. So what I want to invite you to do is just for a moment, to bring to mind, and here we are in the JFK Library, the most inspiring leader that you've ever encountered. And maybe it's one of our past presidents, or maybe it's somebody that's mentored you, somebody that's really touched you deeply in your soul. And as you think about those individuals, what are the qualities of their leadership that so inspire you? What are some of those qualities? Humility, huge one. Beautiful. What else? Humor. Okay, love it. Right on. What? Purpose-driven. Awesome. Empathy. Beautiful, Anna. Passion. Oh, I love that one. Rock on. Inspiration. Awesome. Judy. Authentic. Thank you, Andrew.
Quick to
Distribute credit to others, right?
Aspiration.
Aspiration, right on. Vulnerability. Beautiful. Vision. Huh? Dynamic. Trusting. Awesome. That's just like a great list. This next list may be quite easy to come by as well. Okay. So think about some of the low performance leaders right now, those leaders that kind of bristle you, scare the bejeebers out of you, may have tormented you. What are some of those qualities? Arrogance. Huge. Self-centered. We're going to come back to that. What else? Dictatorial. Right on. You say offensive? Okay, well, okay, defensive. Okay. Defensive and offensive. Okay. Right on, Dwayne. Manipulative. Great. So who are these leaders fundamentally in service of? Themselves. As opposed to these high-performance leaders, they're in service of something larger than themselves, right? So I embody these high-performance and low-performance states, and something I've been working with for a long period of time, something called the reactive mindset and the creative mindset. And I'll share with you the track on how you actually talk about shifting between these two states. And I was looking for a way of quantifying this. And about 3 years ago, I founded an organization, the Leadership Circle, who've created a highly validated instrument that actually quantifies the reactive and the creative mindset. And they've done 65,360 reviews. So this is simply putting a framework around what you've already shared. So these are the domains over here of high-performance leadership. High-performance leaders with a creative mindset are fundamentally achievement-oriented. They have purpose and vision. They're strategically focused, they're decisive, and they know how to get results. At the same time, they relate well to people. they care, they foster team play, they collaborate well, and they mentor well. They have courageous authenticity. They also have systems awareness. They know they're concerned for community, and they know how to sustain productivity without burning everybody out. And then they are fundamentally self-aware. They are personal learners, they have composure, they balance, and they're selfless leaders. These are leaders who are in service of something larger than themselves. Right? On the other hand, low-performance leaders, this gets into some of Karen Horney's work. When we're threatened by ego, we take one of three orientations. On one way, we may move towards people. So these leaders can be actually overly complying, pleasing, conforming, and passive. So these leaders are wishy-washy, they just don't take a stand. Or they're overly protective. They're moving away from things. So they are arrogant, cynical, and critical, and distant. Or they're controlling, autocratic, driven to prove self-worth because they fundamentally are insecure with their self-doubt, and they're perfectionistic. So there's science behind this, and from these 360 reviews, they've looked at these domains that characterize the creative and reactive mindset, and they've also, in their questions, they've quantified measures of perceived leadership effectiveness. Here's the data. The more you are perceived to have a creative mindset as a leader, the more effective you are perceived to be. And that's pretty much a straight line. On the other hand, here's the data on reactivity. The more reactive you are as a leader, the less effective you're perceived to be. So you might say, well, that's kind of interesting, but what does this mean for business performance? Here's the data on this. They did a study with 500 leaders, and they've replicated this now with 2,000 leaders. Here's the data. The more you're perceived to be an effective leader, the higher your performance is as a leader, as measured by sales and revenue growth, market share, profitability, return on assets, quality of products and services, new product development, and overall performance. So this is not soft. When we're talking about the aspiration of creative mindset leadership, this tracks all the way to the bottom line. And so I want to show you now how this connects with an understanding of neuroscience, how neuroscience connects all of this together. And then give you a taste at the end, and certainly in the book, that I'm delighted you all have, where you can drill down and experience the skills and practices that can help you to proactively shift between these two states. So if I were to ask you, honestly, who over here relates to both sets of these creative mindset and this reactive mindset leadership, perhaps even on the same day? Let's just just own up to it. How is it that we can all relate to both of these states? And the reason why you can relate to both of these states is that fundamentally they're normal, because they map to very specific regions and networks in our brain that we all have. So I just want to do a primer on how your brain works, and certainly there's tremendous complexity to the brain. And somebody says, if the brain was simple enough to understand, we'd be too simple to understand it, right? So what I've looked to do is I've looked to create a very simple model that has tremendous explanatory power for our human behavior. And one of the models that I've found to be very, very helpful is a model called the triune model of the brain. How many of you are familiar with the triune model of the brain? Okay, so not many people. Now this is an evolutionary model of the brain put forth by Paul MacLean, past head of the National Institutes of Mental Health. And he developed an evolutionary model of the brain that really, where it says the brain develops from the bottom up and the back forward. Now, I will say that if you look at the literature, there's a lot of people, neuroscientists, that bristle now at the triune brain and think it's overly simplistic. But for the purpose of this organization, it can be really, really helpful to explain a number of things. So in Paul MacLean's model, he describes the first part of the triune brain, he describes is, over here, the brainstem, and he also linked into the basal ganglia, and he called that the reptilian brain. And the brainstem, when you look at the functions of the brainstem, vital life centers, control of heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, also, of course, fight and flight behavior. Part of the basal ganglia feeds into our reward circuitry. So this is very much geared towards survival. Now, unlike reptiles that lay the eggs and skedaddle, as mammals we do something different. We suckle our young, which brings us to the next part in the evolutionary development of the brain, a part of the brain called the paleomammalian brain. also known as the limbic system, a collection of structures, the limbic system. And this part of the brain is responsible for your primal drives, pursuit of food, water, sex, pair bonding. And it's got an important structure that folds over here, and at the tip is the amygdala. And the amygdala lays down emotional memory. And the amygdala links into our reward circuitry as well. And this is all a non-conscious part of the brain. And this part of our brain is forever doing this. We are forever scanning each other like this. Am I safe or not safe? Am I safe or not safe? Is this person or event a reward or a threat to my time? And the moment you match for unsafe, even before you know and consciously aware that you are, you're going to match for that and you will go reflexively into fight and flight behavior and recoil, even before you know you do. Now, if we didn't have another part of the brain, we'd be highly impulsive animals moving towards pleasure and away from pain. So we have the next part of the brain, the third part of the tribal brain that folds over the top. And this part of the brain is called the neocortex, the new brain. I'm not going to go through all the functions, but I do want to highlight a very important structure at the front part of the brain over here, which is the prefrontal cortex. It sits behind over here. And I want to just share with you a number of the functions. And as I share these functions with you, you'll see how they map into the qualities of high performance conscious leadership. So the neocortex is the seat of conscious awareness. This is our ability to weigh the present and imagine a better future and figure out a plan of how we're going to get there. The prefrontal cortex in particular has a number of important characteristics and functions. First thing you'll notice is it folds over what? It folds over the amygdala. So if you know how to activate your prefrontal cortex in very specific ways, you can shut down your stress response within seconds. It also has the capacity, you have radiating fibers coming up through the insula and feeding forward into the brain. So this is a part of the brain that integrates morality, social awareness, empathy, and compassion. It's also part of the brain that's involved in our executive functions, judgment, planning, abstraction, and decision-making. It's also the part of the brain that doesn't only make decisions, but gives you the willpower to follow on those decisions you're making. And then it's got a quality called metacognition, a mindful quality of metacognition. And this is where you can step back and watch the mental track, your thoughts, sensations, emotions, tracking through your field of awareness, and you can say, "Hoi, there goes a damn crazy thought. Perhaps I won't act on that one," right? So the prefrontal cortex is incredibly important. You can see how it maps into those high performance qualities. Now, what is, I find, so inspiring in the brain, if you think of the brain as an engineering system, think of a brain as an engineering system and think about the problems it fundamentally solves. So how is it that here we are as animals? How did we somehow survive through the African savanna as relatively feeble animals to thrive and dominate as a species? How is that possible? What would we have needed to be extraordinarily successful? So fundamentally, what's needed? So firstly, what's needed is we have to be hair trigger for safety. We have to be hair trigger for safety, number one. Next piece is social cooperation. We need to know how to cooperate. And third thing is not only do we need to know how to cooperate, but how do we creatively innovate? And that really explains our success as a species. So how do you solve that as an engineering problem to make sure that the brain can accomplish all of that together? And if you look at the brain over here as this inverted pyramid, the way it works is that information flows up here through the brainstem into the thalamus and distributes up, and you kick out into behavioral responses at every level. And your brain is safety first. So as you're coming up over here, if you feel unsafe, you're going to kick out with a behavioral response even before you know it. Then when you feel safe, information flows and integrates up. You get into the limbic system over here where you actually now are more available to your love and belonging needs. And then, if you feel safe, you're able to integrate at the top level to creatively innovate. And actually creativity, if you look at this of reactivity and creativity, down over here, this speaks to reactivity at the top. Creativity is not a prefrontal cortical action. It's your prefrontal cortical ability to integrate all levels below it. Now, when you look at the brain as a system, what does this correlate to? This is the thing of beauty. What is that? You see it? That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So our brain maps to essentially Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this is just simplified into 3 levels over here. So fundamentally, we are safety first. And once we feel safe, we can go to love and belonging. So safety maps fundamentally into your brainstem and your limbic system. Love and belonging into your limbic system and parts of your prefrontal cortex. And when you're talking about self-actualization, that very much maps into your cortex and your prefrontal cortex in particular. Now, there's another piece of the puzzle over here that explains a lot. And that is, before we can really understand how we fit this all together, we have to understand fundamentally what is the difference between your brain and your mind. So the brain's an easy piece, right? We've been speaking about it over the last few days. The brain, gelatinous mass sitting inside your head, 185 billion neurons, each making 5 to 10,000 connections, right? But what's the mind? What is the mind? So Dan Siegel is a well-renowned psychiatrist at UCLA, and he pioneered a field called intrapersonal neurobiology, where he brings together individuals from all different disciplines. They worked for 3 years, and they finally came up with a definition that everybody could agree with. And so the Dan Siegel's definition was, the mind is an embodied process that regulates the flow of energy and information within your brain and between brains. So the thoughts that we have direct the flow of energy and information in our brain. So if you are having thoughts where you are threatened by stress, uncertainty, and self-doubt, and the key word over here, threatened by it, you're going to go into states of reactivity, and you're going to drive all your information flows down into your survival circuits of your brain. And Daniel Goleman speaks about amygdala hijack. Sometimes you can drive your information flows down so deeply, you may be shouting, you may be screaming at somebody, or your partner, and they'll say to you, why are you being so defensive? And you're screaming, I'm not being defensive, you are. Because at that point in time, you may not even have the awareness of being how reactive you're actually being. You've driven yourself so far down into those circuits. The other thing that this explains, when you drive your information flows all the way down, and you have chronic stress over time, how are you going to feel if you're regulating stress over and over again? What are you left feeling? Exhausted, right? And what if you forego love and belonging? What are you going to feel? Alone, disconnected. And what if you're not meeting your needs for significance? You're going to have a reduced sense of accomplishment. Those 3 make up a triad according to Maslow. Anybody recognize those 3? Exhaustion, disconnection, and a reduced sense of accomplishment. What do those 3 elements make up? It's depression, it's burnout. Those are the 3 classic hallmarks of burnout. So the chronic drive down into the threat of stress and self-doubt will drive you into states of burnout. Now the good news is we also know how to reverse the flow. And if we know how to tap into what inspires us the most, we can drive ourselves up, Maslow's hierarchy, into states of creativity, into giving meaning, right? And here's the new science of stress. Because before I used to talk about how dangerous stress was. And I'd be talking fundamentally about the threat response in stress. And I'd go out and give all this data, how people die more frequently when they have a lot of stress in their life. And all I'd succeed in doing is I was making people the bejeebs. They were now stressed about being stressed out, right? Turns out there are other kinds of stress responses that reverse this flow. There's the tend and befriend response. So when you have moderate stress, you don't only release cortisol. I'm not in right now. Okay. You not only release cortisol, you also release oxytocin, which is the cuddle chemical. It's also the molecule of bravery. And so what happens is your tend and befriend response now activates your love and belonging needs, moving you up. There's another kind of stress response which is just awesome, and it's called the challenge response. How many of you have heard of the challenge response? Awesome. So the challenge response is the kind of feeling you may have had before where you feel really amped up. Like before I came up on stage, I was very nervous. I had a lot of energy. I had stress. But rather than fighting that stress, it was like, here it is. It's go time. Let's go. Right? It's your ability to use the energy of your stress in the direction that really matters in your life. Kelly McGonigal has a beautiful definition of stress. She's a psychologist at Stanford. She says, and this changes the game, she says, stress happens when things you care about are at stake. That's a game changer. That's a game changer. Why? Because that means every time you feel stressed, beforehand the old definition was I feel stressed because I can't cope. But if you know that stress happens because things you care about are at stake, next time you feel stress, first question, what is it that I care about? How can I use this energy in service of that? And now stress is no longer demand. It becomes an asset for you that you can leverage in service of the difference you want to make. And that challenge response activates your capacity for significance. So fundamentally, here we are in this equilibrium. We flip-flop between these states of reactivity and creativity all day long. These low performance, these high performance states all day long. Threat driving us into reactivity. Our capacity to tap into what inspires us the most into creativity. But here's the kicker. As leaders, we're not an island. We influence the character and behaviors of others. One of the most beautiful definitions of leadership that I heard recently is leadership, particularly conscious, high-performance leadership, is the capacity to influence the character and behaviors of others for good. You think about the capacity for influence. A lot of what drives that influence is our autonomic nervous system. And so here we are balancing between these states with our parasympathetic nervous system that's like tapping the brake. So when we tap the brake, we're in states of feed and breed, stay and play, pause and plan, and then somebody triggers us, boom, we step on the gas, the sympathetics, and we go in a heartbeat into fight and flight, we mobilize. So we modulate that, but here's the kicker when this now ties into relationships and influence. I want you to notice the parasympathetics, in particular, the innovation of these parasympathetics in the muscles of the face and the voice box. Over here, the sympathetic nervous system, same thing. You have innovation, muscles of the face, and the voice box. Now I'm going to ask you the question, which Mona Lisa do you find more attractive? 80% of our communication is nonverbal. We thin slice. You cannot armor up. We see stress. We read stress on each other by thin slicing. Tone of voice. So when we get stressed, we lose prosody in our voice. We become clipped. That's why telephone, text messages, you lose so much. People read between the lines and a lot of damage is done. Right on? Yeah. Because you don't have these cues. Because 80% is us thin slicing what's going on. Here you have, so when you actually feel very stressed out, you get a stony stare, heavy set jaw. Everything gets coarse. And you look at that Mona Lisa and say, hell no, not safe, right? Hell no, not safe. You look at that Mona Lisa, parasympathetic, modulated, manifests the Mona Lisa smile, softening around the eyes. You look at that and you see Mona Lisa, safe to approach. Hence, that Mona Lisa is attractive. We're literally talking about what does it mean to become a beautiful leader. It's what is the energy, and you can't do it. This is not strategic. This is how do you embody that internal physiology, leading well from within, so you're embodying that physiology, so you naturally are manifesting that way, so you become the executive that inspire others and other folks want to work with, and you have the capacity of influence in the world. Does that make sense? So let me just share with you a little bit further over here, the neuroscience, and this is really laid out in part 3 of the book, chapters 8 and 9. I go into the neuroscience in fair depth about how we're wired to connect. And this is just one of the systems that we're wired to connect, mirror neurons. But there are circuits of cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, prefrontal cortical regulation. I've already shown you the autonomic nervous system, and they work in symphony so that ultimately the experience of this is when you're lying in bed at night with your partner and your partner is stressed out as heck. How are you feeling? Right? You're wound up. You're not sleeping well that night either, right? Or you walk into a room with a colleague before you go into a deal, you can read the tension and you're going to an orientation even before they open their mouth, right? It's that powerful. It's essentially what happens is because we're wired to connect. One person's fight and flight demeanor is going to trigger yours, which will then trigger your fight and flight behaviors that then trigger theirs. And now you're over in the cycle of reactivity going round and around and around. That's 80% of HR right there, right? So what then is the cycle of creativity? What then is the cycle of creativity? And I didn't know this until about a decade ago. I really kind of struggled. What is that cycle of creativity? And I didn't learn that from the science. I learned that from my mother. And my mother, this is her at age 70 years old. She's my dad's trophy wife. She'd never been sick a day in her life. And she called me up. Actually, I went down. I was living in the Bay Area at the time. And she called me. She said she was not feeling well. She had lost some weight. She had vague abdominal pain. And she went to see a doctor, but her doctor didn't think anything of it. And he went off to the Olympics in Australia, and then he saw a gastroenterologist, and he literally called me and said, I think it's psychiatric. And I said, no way. I said, there's something going on with Mom. So I took over her diagnosis. I'm an internist by training. And I ordered a CAT scan. And I'll never forget the day the radiologist called me. And he called me and he said, I'm sorry to have to tell you, your mom has pancreatic cancer and it's spread to her liver. And I shrieked because I knew my mom was dead within 4 months. I had an intense grief response. And the next phone call I had to make was the most difficult of my life because I had to call and give my mom a diagnosis. And I picked up the phone and my mom answered. And she was very upbeat. She said, I had my test. I think everything went well. I said, Mom, I'm so sorry to have to tell you. You have pancreatic cancer. And it spread to your liver. And she said, oh my God, that's a silent killer, isn't it? She knew she was going to die. I said, Mom, I promise you. I said, I'm going to be down on the next plane to San Diego. I'm going to be there just the shortest few hours. And I got on a plane and I walked into the house that evening and I held my mom in her arms and I said, Mom, I promise you this is going to be the richest year of your life. And I held her. And it was. She lived 13 months, pain-free. And something happened to Mom in those 13 months that was amazing. Now, I don't know if you can see it on this picture, but as beautiful as Mom was, there's some vulnerability in this picture. My mom was racked with incredible self-doubt. She was deeply insecure. And so she would get incredibly angry when we didn't comment how good her cooking was or how good she looked. And her and my dad would go to parties, and my dad was a bit of a flirt, and they would have these roaring fights afterwards. And my dad's response was, he kept saying to my mom, just be reasonable, just be reasonable. And that never went over really very well. And they would go over and over. The moment Mom was diagnosed, she had no need for her self-doubt. She knew that time was precious, so all she wanted to do was to connect with us. So instead of consuming attention, she started radiating love. And it was incredibly profound because we all wanted to be around her. And her friends threw her a celebration of life party. And I don't know if you can see it in this picture. Mom may look beautiful here, but there's a different kind of beauty. This is Mom 2 weeks before she died. There's a different kind of beauty over here, right? And that is just radiating this radiance of love. And 3 days before my mom passed away, she was no longer lucid. And she was in bed. And the rabbi came by. And he had cancer himself. He had lymphoma. And we were sitting at the bedside. It's with my sister. And he leans in and he said to my mom, he said, Yvonne, after all these years, what have you learned is the meaning of your life? And we never thought Mom was going to be able to open her eyes. And I was sure if she was going to open her eyes, she was going to say to get love because she craved love all of her lifetime. She craved love. And miraculously, she opens her eyes. And she says, to give love, to give love, to give love. And she repeated it. And those were essentially her dying words. So I said to a wise friend, a number of years later, I said, my mom had this remarkable journey where she moved from a place in her life which was to get love to give love. And my wise friend said to me, he said, but what if your mom had learned how to receive love in her lifetime? And then it hit me that the cycle of creativity is simply a cycle of being able to receive and give with another. To receive and give love with another. That's how simple it is. To receive somebody else with empathy and understanding and give with authenticity and care. That's the simplicity of it. And in healthcare, when I train burned out clinicians, That's the heart of healing. That is the heart of healing. In business, that's the heart of authentic, connected relationships. At home, it counts for everything. Actually, interestingly enough, in business, through conscious capitalism, I connected with Danny Meyer. If you know anybody who knows Danny Meyer, he's the chairman of the Shake Shack, and has got a number of highly regarded restaurants in New York. And he says there's a very big difference in business between service and hospitality. He says service is a monologue. Hospitality is a dialogue. It's our capacity to truly receive and give with each other. And that really is the fundamental DNA of authentic and powerful businesses. So it may feel banal, but I want to show you some data around that right now, because when you look at these cycles, not only do we oscillate between our own reactivity and creativity, but because we're wired to connect, we're engaged inevitably in cycles of reactivity and cycles of creativity that feed into culture. And so ultimately, when you look at this, when you look at the qualities of low-performance leadership and high-performance leadership, this inevitably either leads to cultures of disengagement or cultures of engagement. And we know that that has, from the data, we know that that has a cost and a benefit. And there's a ton of data out there, and most prolific is Gallup. So when you look at the Gallup data over here, you see differences in absenteeism, turnover, safety incidents, quality defects, in customer satisfaction, productivity, and profitability. We see the data. And then profoundly, when you look at these organizations that embody these high-performance conscious leadership characteristics that drive conscious culture, high-performance conscious culture, what you see is this. This is the work by Raj Sisodia, co-founder of Conscious Capitalism. And he did a study on a group of companies that he coined as being firms of endearment. Those companies, if you look at the performance against the S&P between 1998 and 2013, over a 15-year period, the S&P had a 118% cumulative return. Firms of endearment, 1,681%. It outperformed the S&P by a factor of 16 to 1. So this is not soft science. So how do we go about it? How do we go about transforming this? How do we go about engaging in the change? It comes back to Maslow's hierarchy. How do we fundamentally create safety in our cultures? If there's no safety and trust, it will eat your strategy for lunch. Fundamentally, how do you create safety first? How do you facilitate love and belonging in your organizations? And how do you resource individuals with inspiration and resources to manifest and deliver on the value you want to create? So just to close up, I'll give you just really a very, very brief taste. It's in the book, so I'm not going to go into any great detail. There's a framework that I offer that helps you to proactively shift between states of reactivity and states of creativity at hand. And these are, it's called the 4-in-4 framework. So step number 1 is you cannot effectively navigate your reactivity unless you can recognize it first. So this step helps you recognize your reactive sensations, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And then if you're doing more harm than good, to know how to take the edge off that within seconds. So that gives you a tremendous amount of control. Step 2 is you can take the edge off your reactivity, but things may still have their hooks in you, and you may still lay awake at night, sleepless nights. So step 2 gets beyond your reactive responses, below looking at the underlying triggers and the stress and self-doubt that's driving that reactivity to begin with. And this is where you get into learning how to reframe or reappraise your relationship with stress and self-doubt. How do you go about, for example, converting a threat response to a challenge response? There's science around that this gets into. Now, once you know how to actually do that, it develops a sense of internal confidence and safety within yourself. Now you can liberate a lot of energy from the base of Maslow's hierarchy to focus on your love and belonging and what matters needs, which gets into step 3, which helps you focus on cultivating creativity by focusing on what really matters in your life and knowing how to optimize your health, your relationships, and your meaning, significance, and productivity at work. The most important step over here is step 4, which is knowing how to catalyze growth. And Rudy yesterday said something really profound. He said a lot of what drives behavior is fundamentally the internal dialogue that's tracking away in our brains, right? Chatters away in our brains. And when we're under stress, what drives a lot of our behavior is our brain is primed for safety. So what traffics in our brain is, what if, and all the catastrophes that could happen in our lives, if only, and the regrets of our past, and what's wrong with me and what's wrong with other people, right? In the step of catalyzing growth, which is adapted from the framework of evidence-based medicine, that step begins with asking a better question to begin with. Asking a better question. So what if, when we heard this chatter, we reseeded that dialogue with a more inspired dialogue and more inspired questions? What if we rather ask questions in alignment with the recipe for our flourishing life? Questions like, difficult moment. Instead of what's wrong with somebody else or what's wrong with me, rather asking, in this difficult moment, what's that I'm here to learn? How can I better connect with myself, mind, body, spirit? How can I better connect with others? How can I better connect with my deeper source of inspiration? How can I best express myself? What's my best service? And when you engage that internal dialogue, that then inspires an external dialogue that becomes the fabric of culture. And when we do that, we have the power to transform the world. So my final wish for you is, may you learn, or may you continue to lead well from within, thrive in your life, and make an even bigger difference in the lives of those you serve. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.